30 years of sacrifice, erased with one cruel toast. I sat at that grand dining table, but their laughter rose as if I wasn't even alive. My husband, Edward, clinked glasses with his mother, smiling as if they had already buried me, though I was right there, breathing. Family isn't always love. Sometimes it's the sharpest blade that cuts you. Before we go deeper, let me pause for just a second. Before we dive into today's dramatic story, don't forget to subscribe to Her Betrayal Stories and ring the bell. Here, you'll always find stories of sacrifice, betrayal, and shocking twists. Where are you watching from? Leave a comment below. Who knows, the next story might reflect your very own experience. I am Clara Harrington, nurse by profession, wife by vow, shadow by choice, or so they trained me to believe. When Edward lost his first job, I worked night shifts to keep our mortgage afloat. When Margaret fell ill, I washed her, fed her, prayed beside her bed. When Edward's reckless brother collapsed under debt, I used my father's inheritance to bail the family out. 30 years, I carried the weight of their comfort. Yet that night, as I sat at the long mahogany table, I was invisible. Margaret's voice, sharp as glass, sliced through the air. Edward, with Friday's board meeting, we can finally secure the estate. At last, no more unnecessary burdens. Her gaze swept to me like a blade. Edward swirled his wine, chuckling. Don't worry, Mother. Clara won't be a problem. She's past her use. The fork slipped from my hand, striking china with a clang. My ears rang with those three words. Past my use. 30 years erased, rewritten as useless. Have you ever heard someone dismiss your entire life in one breath? If so, you know the kind of silence that roars inside you, demanding either tears or fire. I chose silence. For now. Later, I wandered through the estate's library, desperate for a corner where my heart could breathe. As I pulled a book of poems, a sealed envelope tumbled out. Edward's handwriting. I unfolded it. A draft of his will. Every asset. The estate, investments, even the beach house I painted with my own hands, was written over to Margaret and his cousin Richard. My name wasn't there. Not once. I clutched the paper, the chandelier's light swimming through my tears. That was the moment I knew. Love had been replaced by calculation. The door creaked. Jake, the young housekeeper, entered quietly, holding linens. His eyes darted to the letter in my hand. Mrs. Harrington, he whispered. I overheard them. They're planning more than you know. Please, be careful. The weight in his tone chilled me more than the draft curling through the room. Plans? I asked. He nodded. Not just the estate. They want you. Gone. Gone. The word echoed like footsteps down an endless hallway. The next evening, Richard raised his glass with a smirk. To family, he said, voice dripping with irony. The kind that trims away the weak branches. Their laughter rang, filling the hall like poison. I pressed my trembling hands beneath the table, forcing calm. Yet deep inside, something shifted. They thought I was powerless, a wilted branch. They had no idea I still had roots they couldn't see. In the guest room they suggested I move into, I sat by the frosted window. Snow blanketed the roses I once tended. Beside me lay another envelope, one they didn't know about. A letter from my father's lawyer, years old, describing a trust clause Edward had overlooked. As I traced the words, a spark flickered inside me. Would I remain the ghost at their table? Or would I rise, reclaiming everything they thought stolen? And so I ask you, dear listener, if you were me, dismissed as past your use, would you stay silent? Or would you fight back? The next morning, I woke in the guest room they had exiled me to. Smaller, colder, stripped of the warmth I once filled it with. A rectangle on the wall marked where a family photo had been taken down. From below, I heard Margaret's heels on the marble, ticking like a clock that measured disdain instead of time. When I entered the breakfast room, the scent of silver polish and wood smoke hit me. Margaret presided at the head of the table, scarf wound tight as if holding her crown in place. Edward scrolled through his phone, ignoring me until he finally looked up with a smile that cut sharper than any blade. "We've been talking," he said casually, buttering his toast. "It's time you considered rest." "A facility, perhaps? Somewhere peaceful? A facility?" My voice stayed even, though the teacup trembled slightly in my hand. "For wellness," Margaret added sweetly. "You've seemed fragile." Forgetful Richard entered, adjusting his cufflinks, lips curled into a smirk. "It's best for the estate. Investors like stability fragile, forgetful." The words pierced like needles. I remembered nights I'd stayed up counting Margaret's shallow breaths during her pneumonia. I remembered everything. "And what about my consent?" I asked. Edward's smile didn't falter. "You always wanted what's best for the family." He slid a folder toward me. Release forms, guardianship petitions, all marked with sticky notes where my signature was expected. I closed it gently. "No." Margaret leaned closer, perfume cloying. "Darling, don't be dramatic. We're offering you care." Richard chuckled low. "Or we can pursue other avenues." The implication was clear: court, isolation, erasure. As they rose to leave, Richard bent near my ear, his breath hot. "You're useless now." When the door clicked shut, Jake stepped out from the pantry, arms full of linens. His eyes darted nervously toward the folder. "Mrs. Harrington." I recorded something. He handed me his phone. On the screen, their voices played. "Margaret. Once Clara's paperwork is in, we move the accounts by Friday. Richard will assume proxy Edward. She won't sign. Margaret. Then we make sure she's unavailable." The clip ended. My pulse steadied into something colder, harder. "Keep this safe," I told him. 2 copies. Hidden." He nodded, then whispered, "The gardener told me your roses were ripped out yesterday. Margaret said they were sentimental clutter. I saved 2 cuttings." On the counter sat a glass with 2 fragile stems. My eyes stung. "Sometimes survival," I murmured, "is quiet." That afternoon, I tried to log into our joint bank account. Incorrect password. Again and again. I called the bank. The supervisor's voice was polite but firm. "Access has been restricted by board resolution for security purposes." "What resolution?" "I'm not authorized to disclose." The line went dead. I sat in the silence, watching my reflection in the black screen. The woman staring back looked older, but not weak. Not anymore. That evening, Margaret hosted a family gathering. The drawing room glittered with lamplight, full of neighbors and colleagues. She relished an audience when she delivered her cruelties. "Clara has been unwell," she announced, voice honeyed. "She may require treatment." Such a shame at her age. A stranger touched my arm gently. "You poor dear." I smiled faintly. "We all need rest sometimes." Richard offered me a glass of champagne, then snatched it away at the last second, handing it to another guest. "Oops." Easy to overlook. Their laughter was soft, but sharp. I wandered to the mantel. The photographs stared back at me. Weddings, ski trips, dinners. I smiled in every one, like someone trained to make the picture look perfect. But in truth, I had been a ghost. Edward joined me, his whisper harsh. "Don't make a scene." "What scene?" "Sign the forms. Rest a month away. When you're better, we'll revisit everything." "You want me gone for the vote." "Business doesn't pause for feelings. Marriage shouldn't die for it either." His jaw flexed. "If you stand in the way, my mother will destroy you." I looked straight at him, then let her try. Later that night, I descended to the basement. Edward thought I'd forgotten the safe's old tricks, but I remembered the repairman's words years ago. Some models still opened with the factory reset. I entered 4 digits no one else knew, the year my father died. The lock clicked. Inside were documents: insurance, deeds, sealed envelopes, and a slim notebook. Edward's handwriting filled the pages with transfers to accounts I'd never heard of. I photographed everything, hands steady as a surgeon's, then I locked it back, leaving no trace. At dawn, a courier delivered a thick envelope. Inside, a petition for emergency conservatorship. Hearing scheduled for Friday. As I set the papers down, something small and metallic slipped from the envelope. A safe deposit key, tagged with a bank name. I held it in my fist, pulse racing. They had just handed me the very blade they feared. I sat by the window, watching snow bury the garden where roses once grew. Beside me, the stems Jake had rescued leaned toward the glass, alive despite the cold. They thought I was finished. They thought I was a branch to be trimmed away. But roots grow deep. And so I ask you, if you held the key to reclaim everything stolen from you, would you act now, or wait until the perfect moment to strike? Snow blurred the streets as I walked into Fairview Bank. The brass railings gleamed. The old clock above the counter ticked 5 minutes slow, as if time itself hesitated here. I need box 317, I told the clerk, sliding the small key. She checked the register, brows lifting. This is under the name Whitford. My maiden name, I said softly. Clara Whitford. In the private room, my hands trembled as I unlocked the box. Inside, thick envelopes, a velvet pouch, and a letter sealed in my father's hand. I broke the seal. My Clara, it read, be kind with a spine. I built this trust for you. If a marriage ever turns coercive, assets bought or sustained with these funds revert to you upon proof. Don't let anyone erase your worth. Beneath the letter lay a recorder. I pressed play. My own voice from years ago, coaxing Margaret to take her medicine as she accused me of poisoning her tea. The date matched her medical chart. Proof. I pressed the recorder to my chest, heart hammering. They thought I was powerless. But I had been carrying a weapon all along. At home, Jake lingered in the corridor, hands twisting his apron. They know you went to the bank, he whispered. Richard installed new cameras in the study. Good, I said. Let them think I'm just retrieving keepsakes. He blinked. But I touched the locket I'd found in the box. Camouflage can be beautiful. Then I asked him for copies of the conservatorship papers and any financial memos he could gather. Rebellion hides in details, I told him. His voice shook. If they find out, Lords will hire you as a witness. You won't stand alone. That evening, I walked to the small house of Lords Alvarez, a lawyer who had left corporate law to fight for women silenced by their families. Her kitchen smelled of garlic and warmth. I laid out the letter, the recorder, the notebook pages. She studied each piece, then looked at me. Clara, she said, you've been gathering weapons without even knowing. We'll counter the conservatorship and file to enforce your trust. But you must be steady. They'll provoke you, paint you unfit. I nodded. I've been invisible for 30 years. Now I can be patient for 1 week more. She smiled, sharp as steel. Then we have a case. The following night, Margaret announced a celebration dinner. The chandelier blazed, silverware gleamed, and every word dripped with venom. Clara, she purred, a car will take you Friday to the clinic. You'll love the roses in their garden. I have another appointment Friday, I said calmly. Richard smirked. So do we. I set my napkin down, my voice low but firm. Then we'll see who keeps the roses. For a fleeting second, Margaret's eyes flashed with fear. Later, in the service hallway, Jake pressed a flash drive into my palm. Emails, transfers, dates. I squeezed his hand. You've done more than you know. That night, I cut the circuit breakers for 3 minutes, long enough to slip into the study. I didn't touch the safe. Instead, I left an envelope addressed to Lords, containing my testimony written in my own hand. When the lights flickered back on, the cameras resumed, and I returned to bed, heart steady. By dawn, the stems Jake had saved had grown thin white roots in their jar. They leaned toward the pale light like survivors. I touched the glass and whispered, "What you water will grow." For 30 years, I had watered everyone else's garden. Now it was time to water my own. Friday loomed, the conservatorship hearing, their trap, and mine. If you had been in my place, holding letters, recordings, and the courage of silence, would you strike early to wound them, or wait until the courtroom spotlight made their fall impossible to deny? Sometimes victory isn't about the fight itself, it's about choosing the stage. The courthouse stood like a fortress of stone, its marble pillars gleaming cold against the winter sky. I climbed the steps with my coat drawn close, the locket at my chest, my father's words steady in my mind. Be kind with a spine. Inside, Edward and Margaret sat side by side, polished like portraits. Richard lounged behind them, smirk fixed as if he already knew the ending. They didn't glance at me. To them, I was already erased. But erasure only works when no one keeps the receipts. And I had every receipt. Judge Whitmore adjusted his glasses, tone clipped. We are here regarding the petition for emergency conservatorship of Mrs. Clara Harrington, filed by her husband, Edward Harrington. Edward's lawyer rose smoothly. Your Honor, Mrs. Harrington has shown signs of instability, forgetfulness, erratic behavior. For her own well-being, guardianship is necessary. Margaret dabbed her eyes with a handkerchief. She doesn't know what's best for herself, she whispered loudly enough for all to hear. The audience, neighbors, business partners, curious strangers, shifted uncomfortably. Sympathy bent their heads toward the Harringtons. For now. Lords rose. Her voice was calm but carried weight. Your Honor, we contest this petition. Mrs. Harrington is not only competent, she is the target of coercion and financial abuse. We submit Exhibit A. The speakers crackled. Margaret's voice filled the courtroom. Once Clara's paperwork is in, we move accounts by Friday. Richard will assume proxy A. Ripple ran through the benches. Exhibit B, Lords continued, handing over bank statements. Joint accounts restricted without Mrs. Harrington's consent, a clear violation of fiduciary duty. Edward's jaw flexed. Richard sat forward, color rising. Jake entered timidly, called as witness. He looked small against the oak-paneled walls, but his voice, steady despite nerves, rang out. I heard them planning. I saved recordings. I saw Mrs. Harrington's roses torn out because Margaret said they were sentimental clutter. She never forgot. They wanted her silenced gasps swept through the room. The judge banged his gavel. Order. I watched Edward's fingers drum faster on the table, the rhythm of a man losing control. Then Lords drew the letter from her folder. Exhibit C, the Whitford Trust, established by Mrs. Harrington's late father. It contains a coercion clause. Any asset funded or maintained through the trust reverts to her if coercion is proven. We have just proven it. The room shifted again. Edward's composure faltered. Margaret's pearls clicked against each other as her hand shook. This is preposterous, Edward's lawyer spat. It's notarized, Lords replied coolly, and binding. The judge studied the document, lips tightening. Richard leapt to his feet. She forged it. She's manipulating. Lords calmly placed the notebook Edward had hidden in the safe on the evidence table. These are transfers Mr. Harrington made to offshore accounts. His handwriting. Shall we call a handwriting expert, or will he admit it now? Edward's face flushed crimson. Yes, I moved funds. But it was for the family. The gallery erupted. Reporters scribbled furiously. The judge's gavel cracked like thunder. If you've ever waited years for the truth to surface, you know the satisfaction of watching it rise like a tide that cannot be held back. The judge leaned forward. Mr. Harrington, you just admitted to concealed transfers. This court finds the petition for conservatorship baseless and malicious. Petition denied. He turned to me. Mrs. Harrington, do you feel capable of managing your affairs? I rose, voice calm but strong. I've managed everyone's affairs for 30 years. I can certainly manage my own. A murmur of approval swept through the gallery. Then, the judge concluded, striking his gavel, this court recognizes the Whitford Trust. Ownership of the estate and associated assets reverts to Mrs. Clara Harrington. The words landed like a verdict of history itself. Edward slumped. Margaret's lips moved soundlessly. Richard stormed out, phone clutched like a lifeline. But the crowd, neighbors, colleagues, even strangers, watched with something sharper than curiosity. They watched with judgment. The Harrington name, once untouchable, now reeked of scandal. Justice doesn't always shout. Sometimes it simply lets the guilty speak long enough to bury themselves. On the courthouse steps, microphones and cameras swarmed. Mrs. Harrington, how do you feel? I paused, snowflakes melting against my hair. Respect isn't given by blood, I said softly. It's earned through love and kindness. And with that, I walked past the cameras, head high, no longer erased. Dear listener, if you had been sitting in that courtroom, if those who called themselves your family tried to declare you unfit just to steal what you built, what would you have done? Fold in silence, or rise and let the truth speak? Because sometimes the sweetest revenge is not anger, but clarity. When I returned to the Harrington estate, the silence was deafening. Not the oppressive silence of being ignored, but the stillness of a storm that had finally passed. No more Margaret's clipped orders, no more Edward's barked phone calls, no more Richard's mocking laughter. I touched the banister I had polished countless times, feeling it differently now, not as a servant to someone else's pride, but as the rightful keeper of my own life. For the first time in years, the house belonged to me. The next morning, I stepped into the winter garden. Snow crusted the soil, but beneath it, life waited. Jake stood beside me, cheeks red from the cold, holding the stems he had saved. They've grown roots, he said, showing me the jar. They'll take if you plant them. I knelt by the wall and pressed them into the ground with my bare hands. The cold bit my skin, but the act warmed me. These roses weren't just flowers. They were proof that even in cruelty, something could be saved. Sometimes, I whispered, we grow stronger when we're forced to start again. News traveled fast. Business partners severed ties with Edward. Invitations once showered on Margaret dried up overnight. Richard fled town, leaving whispers of unpaid debts in his wake. But I didn't smile at their fall. This wasn't about revenge that left me bitter. It was about balance restored. What they watered with greed and cruelty had withered. What I watered with endurance and truth now flourished. I met with Lords and began paperwork to establish the Whitford Foundation. Its mission, to provide legal aid for women cornered by family betrayal. Your father would be proud, Lords told me. I hope, I replied. Other women won't have to wait 30 years to be heard. Edward asked to see me one last time. We met in a small cafe, the kind without chandeliers or servants, just chipped mugs and honest light. He looked older, defeated. Clara, he began, we were a family once. We were, I said. Until you decided ambition mattered more than love. He lowered his eyes. I never thought you'd fight back. That, I said, was always your mistake. He stirred his coffee with shaking hands. Do you hate me? I thought of wasted years, of nights spent tending him and his mother while my own dreams withered. Then I thought of roses taking root in winter. No, I said quietly, I don't hate you. Hate binds me to you. I choose freedom. That Christmas, the estate didn't host a gala. Instead, I filled the dining room with those who had stood by me: Jake, Lords, the nurse who once helped me through Margaret's pneumonia. We ate stew, not caviar. We laughed, not posed. I raised my glass at the head of the table. To families we choose, to voices we reclaim, and to never letting anyone decide our worth again. The chandelier above us trembled, not with tension this time, but with light. Jake began community college with a scholarship from the foundation. He still helped in the house sometimes, though now as a friend, not a servant. Clara, he asked one evening while drying dishes, do you regret not leaving sooner? I thought about it. The wasted years, the pain. Then I thought of the locket around my neck, the roots in the garden, the laughter in the dining room. No, I said. Regret looks backward. I only look forward now, dear listener. If you've followed me this far, you know this was never just about wealth or property. It was about dignity, about finding a voice after years of silence. Respect is not guaranteed by blood or rings or titles. Respect is earned by love, kindness, and truth. And when those are absent, we are free. No, we are obligated to draw the line. Your worth is not measured by how much you endure, but by how bravely you reclaim your right to be seen. And now I turn to you. Have you ever been dismissed by those you sacrificed for? Have you ever been treated as though your worth expired? Share your story in the comments, because here, in this community, we are not ghosts at the table. We are voices, stronger together. If this story touched you, leave a note to your past self or to someone who might need courage today. And don't forget to subscribe to Her Betrayal Stories and turn on the bell. Here, we speak out against betrayal, we honor sacrifice, and we celebrate those satisfying twists of justice, because no one should have to endure in silence.